I'm Gregory Hamer Sr. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. My understanding was we lived there till I was about 6 weeks old. My dad was a welder, and he followed the work. And then from there, they moved to Baton Rouge. They lived in Baton Rouge for a while, and then across South Louisiana in several spots over around Abbeville. He was doing pipelines, and then back to East Texas, where he was from in Liberty County, right outside of Houston. We lived in Port Neches first, where my brother was born. Then we moved to Dayton in Liberty County, and those are really my first memories. We lived there until I was almost 6, and then we moved to Morgan City that summer. Birthday's on July 4th, and we had my birthday party in Morgan City. My mom and my sister took the train, and my dad and my brother and I took his welding truck with our boxer dog.
Yeah, with the dog.
Mattresses on the bed, and we drove to Louisiana. His name was Milton Henry Hamer. He was born in Camey, Texas, which was a little oil-field town. That was the name of the oil company that his dad was working at. And after that, we don't have a whole lot of history on the Hamer side. We have more on my grandmother's side. My mother was a Williams, and she was from Morgan City. That's where her family was from. As I said, my dad was a welder, so 47, they drilled the first oil well offshore in the world was south of Morgan City. So by 52, it was getting fairly active in the oil field here. And so he came over here with his welding truck and went to work. And we moved around South Louisiana. We moved to New Orleans, where I started school in Morgan City. Part of second grade, I went in Franklin. Part of second grade, I went in New Orleans. Third grade, I went back in Morgan City. Fourth grade, I went in Morgan City. Fifth grade, I went to Berwick across the river. Sixth grade, I went back in Morgan City. Seventh grade, I went back to Berwick. They met in Mexico City during World War II. My dad was a welder, but he was also a stainless steel welder, which there were very few. He said one shipyard up in Seneca, New York, where they were at, there were like 3,000 welders, and there were like 4 of them that could weld stainless steel. So they moved him around. They had him down in Mexico City, welding on things down there. Chicago Bridge and Iron had a facility here in Morgan City building dry docks for the Navy during the war, and my uncle worked there, and then they transferred him down to Mexico City. Then meanwhile, his wife has a baby. My grandmother sends her daughter down to help her daughter-in-law with the new baby, and my uncle brought Dad home for supper one night, and that's how they met. And 6 weeks later, they were married. For 25 years, they fought. And then they finally got divorced, and they got along a whole lot better until he died. From there, they moved to Memphis. That's where I was born. My grandmother was from right outside of Houma on By Black, and my grandfather was from Polk Island, which is just south of Morgan City. My grandfather was born there and pretty much raised there, and that's where his family had been. They owned a large piece there, did farming and trapping and things like that. And then my grandmother's family was from the Houma area. We did know a little more about my dad's family. As far back as I got is a great-grandfather during the Civil War was a Baptist minister in Memphis. And I went to Memphis one time, tried to find some information. I really couldn't find nothing. I keep saying that's going to be one of my projects, get someone to look that up.
I am Brenda Hamer. It's very dull because I grew up right here in Morgan City. I didn't move anywhere. 1125 4th Street is about 3 blocks from here, and that's where I grew up. I have an older brother, Paul. He's about 5.5 years older than me. I have a younger brother, Dean. He's about 5.5 years younger than me. Dean was a surprise. You know, you had surprises back in the 40s and 50s. I led a very simple life. I went to Shannon Elementary School, walked to school. Then I went to Morgan City High. Walked over there, played in the band from 4th grade to 12th grade, was a majorette in the band, played basketball 4 years in high school.
Her athletic ability was a lot better than mine.
Oh, you had a bad day.
The newspaper named her Radar because she made a lot of points.
I made the outside points, and when it was a simple layup, I couldn't do the simple layups. My dad was from Creole, Cameron area in Lake Charles. My mom was born in Berg, but her daddy, he came to Morgan City for work. He was a carpenter, and so he moved his family. There were 4 girls and 1 boy. The boy was the youngest. My mother loved to read. She loved school. She really wanted to be a teacher. But in the Depression, you didn't have any choices. So she got a scholarship to go to Hotel Dieu and become a nurse. Back in the day at Hotel Dieu, you earned your work for sure. I mean, you earned your keep. They had to get up and work 8 hours, then they had school for a certain amount of time and got to rest. But when she was over there, she got really, really sick with her tonsils, and she missed quite a bit of school, but she ended up missing out being valedictorian of her class by like a 16th of a point or something like that. It's amazing to me what she did. And then to come home, she went out and she purchased a car. They taught her how to drive. She drove home over the Huey P. Long Bridge. Do you remember the Huey P. Long Bridge when it was just a 2-lane bridge? Yeah. Scary as I don't know what. Later in life, when I found that out, because I found my mother was not very adventuresome and stuff, I said, "You did that on your own?" I cannot believe. They met on a blind date. My aunt, her younger sister, was married. Her husband was doing seismograph work, and Daddy was doing seismograph work. So they set him up. They got married, but she never knew that he was younger than her, because she had made a remark, "I would never marry anybody younger than me," but he was only a year younger than her.
He didn't tell her.
And he's younger than me, okay? My grandma's husband was younger than her, so it must be a thing. They go off to Creole, where he's from. They had Paul. They lived there probably about a couple years, and then they moved back to Morgan City. My dad worked for Shell Oil Company for 21 years. He took care of all the compressors and stuff at Westlake Barrett. He would carpool with a bunch of guys. Shell had a whole lot of men, and they had this organization, they was the Shell people. I was excited because he got an old car, and he let me drive it to school when he wasn't using it. And it was fun. I loved it.
A couple of things about her mama. When she was in her training, she worked with Dr. DeBakey, and Dr. DeBakey became one of the 2 heart pioneers that did heart transplants and that kind of stuff at Methodist Hospital, Baylor and Methodist in Houston. Second thing was, small town girl back in the 40s, when you think about this, that she got that car and was a public health nurse and drove down the bayou to the end of the roads, worked as a public health nurse in those days. You didn't have paved roads, you had shell roads, and a woman by herself in a job that women didn't have.
When'd you get your first TV?
I remember we had one when we lived in Texas.
You were rich,
before
huh?
the 5, before I was 5 years old. And we lived out in the country in Texas.
Well, I was in first grade, and it was Roy Rogers, King of the Cowboys, came on when he plugged that set in. I was so excited. You got that before you got your air conditioning, though. We didn't get air conditioning at my house until we got a window unit. So I was probably a sophomore in high school.
Window units, I
remember before that, though, my best friend across the street, Yvette, her parents had an air conditioning in their living room kitchen area. Only that. And she and I had gone out to the lake and got sunburned, okay? And they invited me to come over and spend the night. I only got to spend one night, but it was heaven. Because when you got a sunburn, oh, that's the worst. They say it wasn't hot, you got used to it. I never got used to it. Ever, ever, ever. I'm still not used to it. When my air condition goes out, it's not fun. Growing up, like you in junior high and high school, you want your hair real nice and everything like that. Well, what Saturdays were for was for getting your clothes all done for the school the next week. You wash your hair to go to church the next day, okay? You roll your hair with bobby pins, okay? And you sleep on that, and you get up early, because mass is at 11 o'clock, and get all fixed up. And I dared anybody to put the windows down going to church. I said, no. You're going to mess my hair up. You're not going to put those windows down. It was only a couple blocks to church, though. And in church, it was hot in church.
Dad, it was basically his way or the highway. People talk about, I thought about hitting my dad. I never thought about hitting my dad. I thought about running over him with a car. Maybe shooting him with a shotgun, but I wasn't going to hit him because he'd kill me. My memory of Dad is he seemed like he worked all the time, and he liked being with his friends. And I think in his leisure time, he preferred to be with his friends than I think with his family. So Mom was always there. One thing I think Mom ever went out of the house for is she bowled for a while, and she'd be on a bowling team. But yeah, my memories of Mom was she was always there. And Dad worked offshore a lot. That's back in the day when he was building his company, and he'd go offshore and stay for a month, and you didn't see him. I remember one time we were in New Orleans. He came in for my birthday. It sticks in my mind. We went to a drugstore, and they got me a deck of cards is what I remember getting for my birthday present, which I was tickled to death with, because it was like Christmas time. You got one present. You didn't get, everything. You got one thing. You didn't realize it because all your friends got one thing too. Everybody was in the same boat. There wasn't as much money floating around as there is today.
My daddy's name was actually Adam E. Connor, but he got the nickname Dodd when he was younger. My dad went to work every morning, came home around 4 o'clock. Mama would have something sweet, like a cake or something like that. And one time she made a coconut cake because Daddy had, a coconut cake would really be nice. So she got a recipe. So she said, Dodd, she said, cut the cake. So he can't cut the cake. She said, Dodd, quit messing around, cut the cake. He said, okay. It turned to praline. Her icing turned to praline. So that stands out in my mind. My daddy was the youngest of 3 children. Their mama spread them out. She put one with an aunt, one with another aunt, and then my daddy's grandfather took him in. He lived with his grandfather till he was about 9 years old. When he was 9 years old, his grandfather died. And that they never said anything about the grandmother, so I don't know if she was around or not. And then at 9 years old, he went from pillar to post, and he was pretty much abused. And when he got to be around 12, his older cousin got married at 18, and she took him in. So he became the older brother of her kids. So she was like my grandmother, Maya, and Charles.
It was really amazing
Charles.
when you think about it, a brand new, newly married couple take a 12-year-old.
Yeah. My daddy was a prankster. He would do stuff like the cows would get in the corn or something like that. And he always liked messing with batteries. He would take a corn cob and he'd stick a wire in it or something. And when the cows would go and get it, he'd electrocute them, give them electric shock, and they'd go away. He ended up being a mechanic. He liked to fix things. And that's how he got his jobs when he came. Oh, what he did to me. We had this 58 Oldsmobile. It was a fine car and had a soft, real melodic horn. And so the thing was, back in high school was the bowling alley out on Highway 90 out there. And I was forbidden to go. Don't go out there, okay? So naturally, I'm going to go out there, right? So I have my cousin with me, and we going by, and I go to blow my horn, and he'd put a boat horn on there. And when I tell you that thing went crazy, I'm going, what the heck did he do? So I pull over to the side and I get out, and I had Rusty, come see. I put the hood up. I said, what do I pull? He said, I don't know. I said, you are worthless. And so it finally died out. Get back in the car. I go home. I walked in the door. I went, what did you do to the horn on the car? You like my horn? No, Daddy, I don't like your horn. He was always doing stuff like that. Like my sister-in-law, they had a little office place where he has Connor's Repair Service, and Paul had packed specialties. Well, my sister-in-law would go in there and work in the afternoons. He glued her telephone to the thing, so she tried to answer, and he couldn't answer it. He was always pulling stuff like that. You never knew. I guess maybe they didn't have a lot to do, that they get themselves all in trouble.
Probably my most traumatic day was moving from Berwick High School to Morgan City High School.
Tell him why you had to move.
Our house burned. My dad came in from drinking one night and decided he was going to fry fish. So he lit the stove, put the grease on the table, and sat down on a stool at the counter and fell asleep sitting there until the flames from the stove jumped over to the counter and lit the Formica counter on fire. It woke him up.
They all got out.
We all went out. He's yelling at us to go up, climb out the window. I remember. So he's telling us to do that. So my brother and I went out the window. I was a freshman in high school, so that was 60. First year, I didn't really know anybody because we transferred late, so my lockers weren't with other freshmen. And then my sophomore year, they moved me with the other sophomores where they do the halls. So she had a hall with lockers with all the sophomores on it. And her best friend was named Gidry, so we wound up with lockers next to each other. And that's, I guess, when I first met her, was she'd come over to her friend's locker. Basically, all I did was meet them.
Fast forward to the next year.
So the next year, we were juniors. And of course, they're both majorettes, so they're big stuff in school. The next year we had lockers again together. And then I tore up my ankle, so I was on crutches, and we had 2 classes together. And so she comes over to her friend's locker that morning, and I'm struggling with my books. And she said, would you like me to carry your books to class? So that's kind of where we first met, I guess. And we found out later, many years later, after we married, that the first time we met, I had a cousin live next door to her, and there was a birthday party, and my mother always told us, well, I have a picture of you all together, and we never saw it until many years later, but they took a picture of all the kids, and we're both in it.
Side by side, and I'm taller than him.
So that was like in first grade, and then later came time for prom. We wound up being on the same prom committee, and one day I asked her to, if she wanted to ride home after the meeting, and so we did. We stopped, bought an ice cream cone, and we were blocked from her house and stopped at a stop sign, and she reaches over as I go to lick my ice cream and goes,
I don't know what made me do that, Greg.
Ice cream all over my face. So that was, I guess you would say that was our first date. It was not.
I don't know, you just had to be there.
We had a date to prom together, and then the night of prom, I take her home. We're getting ready to get out of the car, and she just looks at me. She says, you know, Greg, she says, I really like you, but I don't love you. And when she said that, it was like ice water hit me in the face. And I said, love? I love my mama. What the hell is she talking about? You know?
You just didn't know it.
That was the end of that romance. That was over with. And so the next year, we start our senior year. We'd see each other, but we didn't date at all. Her first cousin lived next door to her. We would all go to high school of religion one night a week. And so I got to go on with Rusty because I knew Rusty was going to be going with her. And so we got to go on a religion class together. And then late in the year, I guess we had a couple of dates. Before the prom, we started dating again, and I asked her to go to prom, and she turned me down. She said, I don't want to go. I got bad memories from the year before. So
prom ain't all what it's made out to be.
She basically said, you ought to just go ahead and get you another date. So I did. You know.
And then what happens is he gets a date with a girl from Patterson across the river.
Which is a long way away back in those days. I mean, it's 10 miles. But
apparently I was the only one she knew at Morgan City High School, okay? So he calls her and asks her to go to prom, but he never calls her back and say, okay, I'm going to pick you up, whatever, yada, yada, yada. So I get a phone call. And she said, Brenda, you know Greg Hamer? I said, mm-hmm. And she says, well, you know, he called me and asked me to go to prom, but he's never called me back. I said, you got to be kidding. Okay, I'll take care of it. So next day at the benches, he pulls up and said, Greg, you called Kay Risha back? How do you know that? I said, because she called me. That's why. You need to call her and tell her what time you're picking her up and what you're going to do, okay? It's funny. Busted. Anyway.
So after that, we did start dating after prom.
Yeah,
anyway.
we did.
And so by graduation, we were dating.
And then he tells me, he says, well, you know, I think we each gone to different colleges. We probably need to date. I went, okay, fine with me. And when was it that you came home?
It worked out pretty good for about a year and a half.
Yeah, right.
For me, she'd come to Baton Rouge a couple times a football season, and we'd go out, and then if she didn't come, I just would date other girls.
So he's leaving on Sunday evening.
One Sunday I came home.
And the phone rings.
That was the other thing. You didn't come home. Like our grandkids, well, even you.
We wrote
back
a lot of letters.
Back and forth all the time.
Too.
I mean,
Phones were expensive.
You couldn't talk on the phone because you couldn't afford a long-distance phone call. And every once in a while, she'd call me, though, because she had a friend that was an operator that would call her on a slow night and say, hey, if you want to call Greg, I'll let you call him for free. And so she would do that. But other than that, we wrote letters back and forth, and then I'd come home maybe once every 2 months, huh?
Yeah, maybe.
I might come home twice a semester.
Anyway,
maybe.
I get a phone call while he's still there. He's getting ready to leave. And it's a guy calling and asked me to go to the movies. My first instinct was no, and I went, you know, maybe I ought to go. Okay, so I said, yeah, I'll go. So he says, well, who was that? And I told him. And he said, were you going to go? And I went, yep, I'm going to go.
So I got back to campus that night, and the next morning I went over to the bookstore and bought drop pins, sent them to her in the mail. And figured maybe we wouldn't date anybody else anymore.
Mm-hmm.
January 1965, we went to the Cotton Bowl, and my dad took the family and invited her to go.
We go into Moyzane Airport, okay, and we're late. And he goes up to the counter. My father-in-law was a very big man. He was
as big as me, but he had a bigger frame. He was a bigger frame. He had a bigger chest.
You know, he smoked a big cigar. You know, he's bigger than life. So we get there, and they tell him, well, Mr. Hamer, the gate is closed, and y'all missed the flight. I kid you not. He grabs that man by the tie, and he says, you stop that airplane, and you let us on. You open those gates back.
And we're all just shocked standing there. And they reopened the plane, told us to go to the plane. They held the plane. I mean, he'd be in jail. I mean, be under the jail today, you do something like that in an airport.
But anyway, we get on the plane. Now, we're flying coach, their first class, Mr. and Mrs. Hamer. White tablecloths, plates, glasses, steak, and potatoes. That's how you used to fly. It was something. That was my very first flight in the whole, you know, whatever.
Has she never been on a plane?
We went to the Cotton Bowl, and we played Arkansas in the Cotton Bowl, the Suey Pigs, and they were undefeated for 2 years, I think, something like that.
National champion.
And we beat him, and then he asked me to marry him.
At that time, that's where we talked about.
We talked about
we were going to get engaged. And then I gave her ring on my birthday, so I'd never forget when we got engaged. So that was the 4th of July. By about the 15th of July, we got the bright idea. We went and told her mother. We said we'd get married when I graduated. And then by the 25th of July, we said, well, you know, maybe we'll get married at the end of this next semester. And about a week later, we got the bright idea, well, maybe we'll just get married before I go back to school. And mentioned that to her mama. And her mama said over her dead body was anybody going to be talking about her daughter.
So we got married in January of 67.
And I left for college first week of September, and I don't think I came back home before the wedding, did I? You think I came home for the wedding?
Home for Christmas.
Yeah, that's what it was. Came home for Christmas.
Because the break at LSU, you didn't get off for Christmas. You would have Christmas, then you had exams.
Yeah, went to school, went back to school for about 10 days, and then you went to Hell Week and had exams.
Which is better now. You have it before Christmas.
So I finished my last exam, got in my car, drove home, had my rehearsal supper that night, and got married the next day.
And Mr. Hamer gave us a honeymoon to Vegas because he liked Vegas. So it was really awesome. We got to see Bill Cosby. I know he's non-gratis now, but I tell you, I never laughed so hard in all my life. He's hilarious. Johnny Carson. Oh, he was the king. Debbie Reynolds.
At the top of her
The
career.
Righteous Brothers. I don't know if y'all even know that.
The Righteous Brothers were playing in the free bar at the Sands. Just a little side bar that it was just a gig for them. And they were singing Unchained Melodies. That was their new song that they'd just come out.
We got to see Sammy Davis Jr., who was an awesome performer. What happened with us is I forgot my coat, okay, because it's South Louisiana, it's not cold. Mr. Hamer told us to go see Mr. George Reese. He was the pit boss.
We're 20 years old. You're supposed to be 21 to go out there. That seemed to escape Dad's thought process that we weren't old enough we couldn't rent a car, we couldn't do anything.
So anyway, he told us to go see Mr. Reese, and so we went to see him, and we said we were here. He said, oh yeah, okay. He says, I have tickets for y'all to go see Sammy Davis Jr. tonight. So when we go upstairs and we come back down, we look around and there's a line around the whole casino thing. These women are with their diamonds and their furs and stuff like that. I got my little $7 dress on, you know, I'm going, oh, Greg, God, we got to get in this line. He said, no, Mr. Reese said to go and find him. So we go find Mr. Reese. We cut the line. There's the stage, and there's our little
my
two-seater
elbow,
right there.
My elbow was on the stage. That's like,
it was fantastic.
We had
I was never that much of a fan of Sammy Davis Jr., but my gosh, after that show, that man could do anything. He could dance, he could sing, he could pantomime, he could do it all.
Tell jokes.
He was tell jokes.
it was such different times. We grew up in a segregated South. I never knew a black child. I knew black adults. You just didn't come in contact with them. They had their schools, we had our schools, and we go on our honeymoon, we get out there and here you have a black entertainer, and we were two kids from the South. I never really watched Sammy Davis, didn't know anything. We walked out of that thing saying, my God, he's the most amazing entertainer there is.
Yeah.
He was just fantastic.
Really was.
Morgan City was just a bunch of self-made men.
All feel though.
Most of them were first generation. It was a wild time. These guys, they walked around with neon signs on their back. I mean, everybody knew who they were. Most of them were very gregarious.
But your dad started with Wham, right? Three partners. Then
Three partners.
Bought them out.
And over the years, him and one bought out the third, and then later he bought out the other one.
And then he had Hamer's Hammers.
That was the business, Hamer's Hammers. And then he sold it my senior year in college to Tidewater Marine. And then about 2 years later, they changed the name to International Hammers. Yeah, after college, my plan was always to come home and go to work for Dad. And then he sold the company. When I asked him, I said, well, how much are you going to pay me? He said, I'll pay you $600 a month. I said, well, Dad, I got an offer in Baton Rouge for $650. He said, well, son, you ought to stay in Baton Rouge. So he definitely didn't believe in spoiling you. So we came home and it just wasn't working out. So I transferred over to Tidewater. After, I guess, probably a year, I happened to walk out to one of the boats one day and I saw one of Dad's old welders welding out there who I'd known all my life. Walked up to him and said, hey, Gerald, how things are going? He said, I don't know. I said, what you mean? He said, well, look at this. Look at this ticket book they gave me to come over here to work with. And I looked at the book and it made out to another company. And I kind of looked at his welding leads and I followed it to his truck. And sure enough, it was one of Dad's trucks. And I said, what the hell? He said, I don't know. He said, but this is what they give me to work at. They knew the company was owned by Tidewater. They're working on a Tidewater boat. And they weren't very smart, but they had been doing it for a while. And so I called Dad and we went over there and sure enough, that's what had happened. They were embezzling out of the company. And so
his top guy.
His top guy who had been with him for 30 years since he started his business.
Paying a good salary too.
And all he could tell him, he said, well, I wasn't stealing from you. I never did this when you owned the company. I said, I was just doing it when Tidewater had the company. But if I hadn't have stumbled on that, when that would have come down, there's no way they wouldn't have thought Dad was complicit in it too. So then he said, why don't you come back to work for me and run the company? And I said, nah, I don't know if I want to do that.
No, you said,
so
give me some time to think about it.
Her and I sat down and we talked about it. Of course, it was going to mean a big pay raise. So I finally wound up going back over there and started running the company. That went on for a couple of years, I guess. And then they sent us a deal. We weren't getting along with the guy that was running all the subsidiary companies for Tidewater.
He said y'all were making too much money.
He wanted to have lunch with us one day, so we go to the Petroleum Club. He has an annual report. It brand new. It was hot off the presses. We hadn't seen it. And he shows us, opens it up to the annual report. And he says, look at y'all's company. And we were like 2% of Tidewater's capital was invested in our company. And we were like 9% of the profit of Tidewater. In his company, which was a lot bigger than ours, but he was over all those subsidiaries, his company was a lot bigger. They were like 8% of the capital, but they were only like 5% of the profit or something like that. And so we look at each other and say, oh, we did good. And he looks at us and he says, no, he says, this is obscene. Y'all are overcharging your customers. Dad looked at him and said, are you out of your mind? And that relationship went downhill from that moment. It never got any better. And so it was about a while later, they were encouraging us to get involved in the local community. I notified them and said, hey, they're going to have an election for parish police jury and I'd like to run. And well, let us get back to you. So I waited. A couple of weeks later, I called them back and said, hey, nobody's told nothing. And they said, well, we're going to get back to you. So finally came qualifying, still hadn't heard nothing. Like 4:45, qualifying at 5, I drive to Franklin. About 4:45, I walked in and I registered. The next day they called me and said, you can't run. And I said, well, guess what? I just qualified, I'm gonna run. And so that went on, I got elected. Then they came to me and said, you're gonna have to resign. If you don't resign, you're gonna have to quit. By then, We really weren't getting along with them at all. Our attorney told us, he said, under no circumstances do you quit. You signed a non-compete agreement with them, you do not quit. They have to fire you. And when they fire you, they got to give you a piece of paper in writing that they fired you before you leave your office. So a few months worked on, and they kept saying, you got to quit, you got to quit. And I kept saying, nope, I'm not going to quit. And they finally sent the guy down, and one of the vice presidents, and came down and got on a speakerphone in Dad's office. And they said, you have to quit. I said, I'm not quitting. They said, well, okay, you're fired. I said, okay, fine. I need a piece of paper saying that. We'll get you a piece of paper. Okay. So then the president of the company is on the phone. He asked Dad, he says, well, Milton, what do you think about it?
You
and
can't
in language that I can't repeat. He told him what he thought about the idea and what he thought about him personally, and went on to say, and by the way, if I ever catch you in my town again, I am gonna whip your all over town. And if you see me walking in Canal Street, you better get on the other side of the street. Well,
fast forward,
a couple of years later, Mr. Victor Garisco dies. He was the largest stockholder in Tidewater. His fleet was half of the Tidewater fleet. He had merged, the two companies had merged. I get a phone call. It's a couple of years later. We'd long gone. And it's the guy that got the job to come fire us, who was really a nice guy that we liked. And he called me, he says, Greg, he said, I got a request for you to make. He said, I need you to ask your dad something. I said, what? He said, well, Mr. Vic died. John's got to go to the funeral. He says, if we fly a helicopter in and land next to the church, will your dad promise us that he won't do anything? Because they knew Dad was going to be there because he was friends with Mr. Vic. And so I said, let me get back with you. So I went and talked to Dad. He said, you tell the sorry blankety blank so they can fly in, but they better get back on the helicopter and leave. And that's what they did. They flew a helicopter and landed next to the church. When I went back, he basically said, here's the keys, run the company. 2 years earlier when I left, didn't have no sense to turn the lights on. So I got elected to the police jury when I was 25. I guess the way it affected the family, I was making $7,200 a year. And I found out after I was elected, they were going to pay me $3,000 a year for being on the parish council. I said, you got to be kidding. I didn't even know it when I ran, but that was a hefty pay raise.
You mean I get paid?
That was a good supplement to our pay back then. But I spent 8 years on the parish police jury, and then I got off and waited 3 years, and then I ran for the city council and got on that. And then I was mayor pro tem for the 4 years, and then I got off.
You ran for mayor and lost.
And I ran for mayor and lost a couple of years later, well, 4 or 5 years later, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And he told me once he lost, he wasn't running again.
I would have done things differently as mayor than they happened, but it is what it is. And so after that, it's all been appointed stuff. I've served on the Coastal Zone Commission. I've served on the University of Louisiana Board, a couple other things, but that's pretty much it. There were a lot of things I liked about my father. There were some things I didn't like. I always made a point that I was going to be a lot more family oriented than he was. I think I worked as much as he worked. But when I wasn't working, it was all family. I didn't have any hobbies. If I did anything, we did it together. The polite thing to say is that I took our family out of the oil field after 3 generations. The more truthful way to say it is the oil field left our family after 3 generations. But oil field collapsed in 82, but the oil field really started the collapse in 80, and nobody realized it by 80. Late 81, 82, everything had gone to hell. We turned down an offer to sell in December of 80, and in August of 81, we accepted half the money we had been offered in December and sold the company. And by then, McDermott had shut down, and with about 6,000 employees, had shut down. Movable Offshore had shut down with about probably 2,000. Raymond International had about 1,000. Avondale had 2,000 at least. Service Marine probably had 800. I had 500 in my yard. And within just a matter of a couple of months, all the heavy industry stopped. We were able to sell. We didn't really get a whole lot of money for it. So I just thought the oil field was going to be down for a couple of years. Like there'd have been a couple of slowdowns, and before there was a couple of years they were back. This time it lasted about 10 years. And so I said for a couple of years, I'll just find something else to do. I'd always thought when I got out of college that either a ranch-style filling station or a fast food restaurant would be an interesting thing to be in. They were just getting started when I got out of school, but then I went in the family business. Well, 10 years later in Morgan City, we had everything else that was here. As far as fast food, they had ranch-style filling stations. They had all of that. So only thing they didn't have was Mexican.
So then he comes home one day for supper. He said, I decided what I'm going to do. I said, okay, what are we going to do? He said, we're going to open up a fast food Mexican restaurant. And I looked at him. I said, you don't even eat tacos. What do you mean? He says, well, I figure you and the kids like them.
Every time we'd go to Houston, when I go on sales calls, she came with me. She'd always want to go to a taco restaurant. And I never wanted to go because I didn't like Mexican food. I have definitely developed a taste over the last 40 years. I sat out in my office one day and I picked up the phone and called information in New Orleans and asked them for a taco restaurant. And they came back and the operator said, well, we have two. We have Taco Bell and Taco Tico. And that's where God put his hand on my shoulder because I said, let's go alphabetically. And I never called Taco Tico. I called Taco Bell with that first number. They gave me a number in California. They gave me a number in Chicago. I got the guy in Chicago, told him I was interested in talking to him. He said, well, I'll be down next month. I'll come talk to you. I said, no, I don't want to wait that long. He said, well, what you want to do? I said, I'll come up there. He said, when you want to come? I said, how about tomorrow? He said, okay. So I went to the airport and flew up. I didn't even take an overnight bag with me, and walked in his restaurant, looked at it. I said, well, this is kind of cute. He said, you never seen one before? I said, no. He said, well, we got about 2,000 of them. I said, well, I've never seen one. And the rest was kind of history. I came home and sent him my money for one, and we opened the first restaurant here in Morgan City. And my dad, who was dead set against me doing it, goes in after about a week, which we later found out that when you open in a small town, everybody for 50 miles comes. And so a month later, you can't sell in a month what you were selling in the first week. So Dad's over there thinking I'm the smartest guy in South Louisiana after we opened it for the first week. My dad would loan money to a guy off the street if they walked up and asked him. So when I got the opportunity to do the one in Houma, I went and said, well, Dad, I need you to countersign a note for me. And he turned me down because by now my restaurant wasn't doing that well because the oil field was collapsing now. It was really starting to get bad. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. He said, you're crazy. You're going to lose more money. So I went to her cousin who was with one of the other banks in town. And I said, Rusty, I need to borrow $25,000. He said, okay. He said, I can get that for you. He said, but I got to ask you a question first. He said, why are you not borrowing the money from your dad's bank? I said, because my dad won't loan me them. He won't sign for it. He said, well, Greg, my board is not going to allow me to loan you the money if your dad won't do it. He said, they're not going to cross him. So I said, well, what I'm going to do? He said, well, I got a friend in Houma. I said, okay, let's try him. And so I went to Houma and I talked to the guy over there and he loaned me the $25,000. And with that, I was able to close the deal on the Houma restaurant. 2 months after we opened, the largest shutdown in Louisiana history happened a mile away from the restaurant when Delta Iron Works closed overnight. They didn't even go through Chapter 11. They just went Chapter 7, just bam. The next day, they had 6,000 workers one day. They closed the next day. And so then I thought that was going to be the end of us, but it turned out that it wasn't.
They pulled from a bigger area in Houma. They got all those little areas around there, and that was our saving grace to have opened that one. Because if we'd have stayed with just Morgan City, there's no way.
So about 3 years later, I guess, we opened our third one in Laplace, and then the guy up in Alexandria got in trouble with corporate. I'd made him an offer about a month earlier. He had turned me down, and then the day her daddy died, I get a phone call. He's on the phone, and he's literally crying because Taco Bell had come in and shut his restaurants down. He said, would you still buy my restaurants? I said, yeah, I'll still buy your restaurants. And so I went to the bank. I'd already talked to him about it earlier, and I went back to the bank and told him that we could do it. And the president of the bank said, well, he said, that guy's got to sell now. He said, I think you ought to offer him less money. And I said, no. I said, I wouldn't sleep good at that. I said, it was a fair offer what I offered him. If he'll take it, I'm going to pay him what I told him I'd pay him. And so we doubled the size of the company. That was my most traumatic thing I've done in the business, was doubling the size of the company in that one day. And so by then we'd set a goal to get 10 restaurants. After we did that, I said, well, maybe we get 10 restaurants in 10 years. And we didn't make it. We only had 8 restaurants at the end of 10 years, but we had 18 at 11 years. So we had an opportunity to buy some stores in Texas, and we did that and started growing from there. We're about to buy 12 more, and so we'll be over 200 restaurants, just Taco Bells. We've tried A&W root beer. We've tried Teriyaki Express, which is Japanese fast food. We've done Dat Dogs, with gourmet hot dogs. Never made money in any of those things. We seem like we can make a little money in Taco Bell, so we think we're going to stick with Taco Bell. We've had two runs with bankruptcy attorneys, and fortunately, both times we never saw a courtroom. We were able to turn things around and
hadn't been easy, but
pay our bills.
Yeah, didn't leave anybody with owing them money. So his deal is, we build the business, we have jobs for the kids.
Well, my girls went off to college and they came back and they married local boys. We kind of thought the only way we're going to keep them here is have jobs for them. And so we had to keep building the business. So Valerie's husband worked for us on the oil-field side at one time, and then we had bought a health club. He ran that for a while. Then we sold the health club. Then he came into the office. My youngest daughter's husband, he was always in operations. So he really started off running the KFC side of the business, but he did every job. He actually worked in our Natchitoches store when he was in college as a crew person. And then after they got married, he worked as assistant manager, area coach, and now he's director of operations. So all the restaurants answer to him. Valerie, she ran a restaurant for a couple of years.
After a hurricane, she got baptized by fire.
I told her if she worked a couple of years running the restaurant, I'd bring her in the office. So we did that, and she came in and she did marketing for us and things like that. And then our youngest daughter was a CPA, and so she was she came in as our CFO.
Working of an accounting
Yeah, a couple of years working as accountant. Greg's a few years behind them. He came in after college. In fact, he worked while he was still in Baton Rouge. His wife, she was working on her degree. She was behind him. He worked from Baton Rouge, did auditing in the restaurants, inspections and things like that. And then after she graduated, they wanted to stay in Baton Rouge, and Brenda bribed them to come down here by telling her that she'd let her use her housekeeper one day a week.
Whatever works.
Got them to move back to town. So we had all of them here. And then where we're at now, Valerie and Tracy both went home after they both worked about 15 years. Valerie's husband retired, 2-3 years ago. John, Tracy's husband, he runs the operations today. And Greg runs kind of everything else on the support side, which would be insurance, human resources, maintenance, real estate, all the development. And then we have a CFO that does the accounting side of the business. Our first grandson's in there now. I guess he's been there 3 years. He's been through every department. He ran a restaurant for a while. He did the auditing piece. He spent time in insurance, and now he's in HR. I suspect that's probably where he'll wind up, is someplace along with the HR side, because that side of the business continues to grow, and it's growing. It was a one-person shop 5 years ago, and there's 5 or 6 people in it now, and we're probably don't have enough because HR is becoming such a big piece of it. And then we got another grandson that's wanting to come into the business, so I've heard, but his father has said he can't until he spends a couple of years outside the business before he comes in, which I think is a real good idea, to spend some time away. Then when they come into the business, they realize we're not all crazy. That's the way it is. So I enjoyed traveling. I was trying to get into golf, but the doctor tells me my golf days are over.
Clubs to Connor. That ain't happening. You can't walk when he finishes golf. When they graduate from high school, anywhere they want to go.
First up was Connor, and he wanted to go on a World War II trip. So him and I went to Normandy on our own, and then we went into Paris, and we met up with the tour group, and we took a tour with the World War II Museum. And then the next year, it was Elizabeth. And
so I went on that one.
Yeah, Brenda gets to go when it's a girl, and the mama gets to go. So
Tracy and Elizabeth
went. We went to Monte Carlo and then to Paris. The next year was his brother Garrett, who at the last minute couldn't go because of football. She was terrified because she thought she was going to have to go on an African safari. But Connor steps up and took the bullet for her.
He took the bullet. He was so good.
He took the trip. The next one was Madeline, and
I
she
went on
wanted
that
to
one.
go, where did
Scotland.
we go? Oh, to Scotland.
England and Scotland.
England and Scotland.
So I went on that one.
It skipped Cooper because he didn't want to go.
Yeah.
He's in school. So Barrett went, and he wanted to go to Rio de Janeiro. And so I said, well, if we're going to do that, why don't we just throw in Buenos Aires while we're down in South America? So we did a trip to Rio, and then to Peru, and then to Argentina. Cooper still has a trip he hadn't taken. Now he's out of college.
And Hugh hadn't taken
You
his.
hadn't taken one, and Lucy hadn't taken one. And then Gregory will be next year. I keep telling them they better step up pretty quick. Grandpa might not be here.
Or be able to make it with his back.
I like traveling. She humors me by coming,
Well,
but now she's getting to where she says, find somebody else to take with you. Valerie and I went to Israel together, and then my brother and I went to a World War II trip to the Philippines
Pacific, yeah.
last year, and then we went to Australia, and then
Twice.
last year we went back to Australia and did a trip to the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal,
we
and
went
then
to
to
Hawaii
New Guinea.
to see in-laws when they were still in Hawaii. On our 50th wedding anniversary was 2017. We took the whole crew to Rome, and then we did Tuscany. It's like herding goats, though. Next time, we'll pay for everything, but y'all schedule it.
I'm gonna say,
We're not gonna
You
do
take care
that.
of your family. We'll meet on this day, this place, and you bring your family,
think
and we'll just take the two
The
of
most
us.
enjoyment we get is being with them. Well, it first started off, we lived right off of Astor Street, and we'd walk to the ball games. So we would go to the games, just you and I, and then we would take the girls on a game.
Mhm.
I mean, it seems like we would always go on the coldest game, and then we kind of sip them a little whiskey, so they wouldn't be so cold.
There was one game, I don't even remember who we were playing, but they have those little, on the west sideline,
Like cubby
they have these
holes,
little,
like.
above some of the tunnels where you go into the tunnel, there's a little square up there, makes like a little box.
Like a bunker.
It has walls around it. And it was so cold, and the stadium was almost empty. And we
Yeah.
had stopped at a convenience store and picked up some plastic trash bags and a little bottle of wine, took it in there, and I got the girls, and we got these trash bags over our heads, and we're inside that little cubby hole, and we're feeding wine to the girls to keep them from freezing. So we watched the
Yeah,
game.
you never leave.
Yeah, you don't
never
leave.
leave the game. I don't care if you winning or you losing. You never leave.
We had a motor coach when we started taking it, when nobody was bringing motor coaches to the ball games. Got a fabrication yard, so I built a rack on the back of that big old aluminum barbecue pit I'd built.
Still got it.
Yeah, that thing's 40 years old.
Yeah.
Took you a while to get it lit, but when that thing got lit, it would burn forever. We'd barbecue out there, and then we had a second motor coach. We'd bring two motor coaches and park them side by side, and we'd just have a bunch of customers. And one day a guy walked up to me and he says, I noticed when you finish cooking your meat that the pit's still hot. He said, would you mind if we throw a steak on there? I said, sure, don't help yourself. It became a community pit after that. We'd fix our steaks, and if anybody else wanted to bring a steak, just go throw it on the pit. We were always attached to LSU because we were married while we were there, and Val came while we were there. We liked Baton Rouge, and so where we financially could have always supported the school, and as we've been able to give more, we've given more. And then a few years ago, I got asked to be on the TAF board, and I got on the TAF board. Come January, I'll be the chairman of TAF for 2 years. And then the Alumni Association put me in the Hall of Distinction a couple of years ago in the Alumni Association. And the Business College put me in their Hall of Distinction, which would really upset a bunch of my professors I had back then if they were to find that out. And we do have a gate.
We got a gate.
We
Gate
got a
7.
gate there. LSU's been a big part of our life, and we pretty much indoctrinated the
Yeah,
kids.
we pretty much brainwashed
And if
them.
they didn't play football at some other school, they went to LSU. So, I think the biggest pleasure, like Brenda said, it was just the spirit of family. And, our children are all grown. I think they like each other better now than they did 20 years ago. I would hope that's a accurate assessment. The in-laws seem to all like each other.
The grandkids
And our grandkids,
think- feel they're more brothers and sisters than cousins. I don't know, when they were little, they were in the nursery upstairs at the office because their moms worked. Connor, Elizabeth, and Garrett, they those three were together, and Tracy came to me one day. She said, "Mom, don't you think it's hard on Elizabeth being an only girl?" I said, "It's gonna make her tough." I was the middle of two boys. It's gonna make her tough, and she's tough.
Watching the grandkids interact with each other, even the ones that are married now, they're all friends. They like to socialize together.
And Rowan is getting so much attention.
And hopefully that'll stay that way. Families tend to drift apart, especially at the first cousin level, as time goes by, but they manage to stay close together. And I guess some of that's our fault because we kind of force them to be together. So, I guess if we got any traditions, it's probably pretty much Easter, because everybody gets off for Easter and all the children like the beach, and so they all have an excuse to go there, and we're able to get them all together, even the married ones.
Christmas is getting iffy now because a lot of them have to go to the in-laws and stuff like that. So that, you have to understand, you got to share. My
birthday is another easy one for them because they're all off of work and people don't have a lot of family traditions. So I think that's another chance. They all like the beach, so they like going. They like going to Florida, and it gives them an excuse to go.
Our fault.
Well, there is Mardi Gras.
There is that.
Which is our eldest daughter's favorite holiday. She likes it better than Christmas. We've been involved in Mardi Gras in the Morgan City area for a long, long time. Everybody in the family likes it except the one sitting next to me.
I'd go to Destin.
She'd leave the state for Mardi Gras. So, be appreciative of what you got and realize that there's a whole lot of people that aren't near as fortunate. But for the will of God, you never know what's going to happen.
We've come close twice to losing everything.
I've always thought you need three things. You need to be fairly competent in what you're trying to do. You need to work your tail off, and you need to have a little luck, whether it's you call it grace of God or whatever you call it. You need those three things, because I've known people that worked their tail off and they were competent and they just had bad luck. And I've known people that weren't competent, worked their tail off and had very good luck. So
I think you need to be faith-based too, because I don't know if we'd have made it without our faith. I really don't.
I think we look back on 57 years and we've had so many of our friends get divorced over the years. I think there's a lot to be said for worshiping together. A lot of times I didn't want to go to church and she made me, and a lot of times she didn't want to go to church and I made her.
Yep. But now when we don't go, something's missing during the week. Just things like things don't go right. When they get married, we always tell them, don't ever go to bed mad. Stay up all night if you have to, because little things can become big things if you go to bed mad on them. And that was hard for me. You have no idea.
We've spent some nights where we've sat up half the night until someone said, okay, I'm sorry. And we really believe that. And I don't know if our children have always followed that. We have always encouraged them to do that. And we encourage all our grandchildren to do it, because something happens when marriages break up. At some point, they quit talking to each other, or somebody quit saying they were sorry. I think you have to be aware of the consequences, and you have to talk about them. You have to pay attention to what's happened to other families. And there are lots of examples of where money has just destroyed families that you thought were close. And that's my biggest worry. My biggest worry is that my three children all know exactly what's going on, that if they have a question, it gets answered, and that they all think they're being treated fairly. Because if it gets to where they don't think they're being treated fairly, then that's where problems start. And that gets more difficult as time passes, as the grandkids come on. We had to go through it in the company. You at some point, you have to pay people for the job they're doing. And we tried it all kind of ways. I tried keeping it even, but people work at different levels, and whoever's doing the bad job has got to get more pay, because if they don't get more pay, then they don't want to do the bad job. So I think as we go into the next generation, there'll be some of the kids want to be in the business. There'll be some of the kids that don't want to be in the business. Well, the ones that are in the business are going to get a salary for the job they're doing. The ones that are out of the business are going to get a dividend for the stock that they have.
Yeah, you try to be fair.
You got to be fair about it, I tell what I always said to our employees, I'd like you to treat me like you expect to be treated, because that's how I'm going to treat you. And a lot of people still feel that way. Some people don't. Some people are motivated by other things, and they look at that as, oh, well, that's just doing business. It's not anything personal. Well, at the end of the day, it is. You should run your business like you run your personal life. And we see a lot of that in the media and all this. They make no question there are some bad people running some big businesses, but there are a lot more good people running big businesses that they get a bad name for what some people are doing, just as a bad cop makes all the cops look bad. In this whole society we've got now, it's to jump on that kind of thing. I mean, they take glee in it, all these reality shows where people are saying how miserable their lives are, and people just eat that up. And to me, that's something wrong with society. I don't take enjoyment out of watching somebody else fail, or people wishing a political appointment, that I hope you lose everything. No, I don't want to wish that on anybody, because my feeling is I don't want nobody wishing that on me. Some of those kind of things you might get, the good Lord might see fit to give you back. We tend to get more serious about our faith as we get older. Probably a couple of reasons. One, you got more time. Second thing, you're looking at your time's getting shorter. I worry about our country. Stuff in the news, 50% of the people don't practice any religion on a regular basis. I think that's really bodes not good for our country. Whatever religion you belong to, you've got to believe this country's been so blessed. And to think that we're turning away from what has traditionally been the foundation of America, it's a concern. We're still the best place in the world to be, but we've got some issues. And it's just scary. I'm hopeful that there's cycles that we're running in, and this is a down cycle for the country, and that there's still great days ahead of us. 20 years ago, they were saying how so many jobs were going to be gone away with. What were people going to do? And yet you see everybody's still looking for employees. And yeah, computers have taken over a lot of jobs, but there's still a need. They've created additional jobs that need to be done. I think that may be one of our big problems with the government right now, with this overreaching that they're trying to do into every aspect of our lives. They're doing it in a lot of ways. They're tightening down on the drug companies. Yeah, the drug companies make a lot of money. They charge a lot for drugs. They sell them other places a lot cheaper. But they're the reason we're all still alive. Or not, maybe not y'all, but at our age. It's the reason we're in relatively good health. It's because all the pills we take. Somebody invents those pills, and they can take away that through tax structures and things like that. I'd like to see a competency test for elected officials along with an IQ test.
I guess you got to be optimistic. You got to think things are going to be okay. And hope and pray too. I want it for y'all, because y'all going to be living in it.